wild animals are more predictable than men. Leaving like a piece of your hair in an Uber, and like the location sharing I've always been doing, and then also like like staying on the pretending on the phone,
really that off, really that acting
acting crazy,
all these
things, and it's just like
I can't imagine not walking downtown and not thinking about
crazy that
across the street.
There are people out there who are never going to
noticing that my tank is empty but not getting gas.
Do you think man or bear?
Probably go with bear.
Yeah, same. Before we get started, I want to let all listeners know that this episode discusses heavy topics such as rape, abuse, sexual assault, sexual violence, sexual harassment, and domestic violence. If that is too much for you, then please click off this episode and go read some other articles on the horizon, and we will see you back at a later episode. If you or someone you know is experiencing sexual assault, you are not alone. The Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network operates a national sexual assault hotline. You can call their number at 800-656-4673, and they also have an online chat available 24/7 at their website, rain.org/resources. Okay, so circling back to violence against women, I wanted to ask you, when was the first time you became aware that you weren't necessarily safe?
I think it was I wanted to go on a walk in elementary school, just by myself, around the neighborhood. And my mom was like that's fine, but you need to take the dog. And I live in a fairly safe neighborhood, and I am a white woman, so I do recognize that I have more privilege in that sense. But I think that was, I didn't really think much of it at the time because I was 9, but then in hindsight, it's because even with all of that, even in our safe suburban neighborhood, you can't always be sure. So I have been I've never been catcalled. I've been lucky in that sense, but I think a lot of that is because of just the environment I'm in, and just because I haven't, nearly everyone I know has. And then there are more subtle things that you start recognizing as you get older, like dress codes and a lot of the expectations on women to the responsibility that society places on women to mitigate the actions of men and preempt them. And I think that's something that I gained awareness of as I got older, as I started seeing things around me and what have you.
So for at least for me, because I remember I had 2 older brothers, and I never really noticed it at first because when you have older brothers, everyone's always like, oh, they're gonna protect you, you're set for life. So I thought that when my mom was like, oh, take one of your brothers, she was doing the sibling thing and not because I was a girl. But I always remember because I was raised Catholic, and at least when you say women are responsible for the actions of men, I never went to one of those super conservative churches they would tell you that explicitly, but it was really really implied, because the first story you learn is Eve was tempted by the devil, and then she convinced Adam to eat the apple, and that's why we are where we are, that's why we're all sinners. And so it was prominent. The most holy woman in Christianity is Mary, the Virgin Mary, who never had sex, who got pregnant with Jesus, she was a virgin, and that's her whole thing. And then you're just taught from a very young age a woman's responsibility is to in that being in the role of serving someone, and then you couple that with the sort of underlying as you got older, people would be oh, well, it's normal, for this teenage boy or for the preteen boy to be constantly thinking about sex, to be interested in his female classmates, which very well may be true that they may be going through that during puberty, but it totally ignores that, girls also go through puberty and experience, sexuality and are not, it's not normalized for them to be, looking at boys and, touching other boys because they feel this way. And I just feel it is very underlying from a very young age. And then also just I was born in 2007, so all of those, like, rom-coms that you get really into when you're, like, 12, 13, 14, it's so, like, misogynistic.
I know. Even, like 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yeah.
Like, you would think that, like, oh, like, strong female protagonist, like, she knows what she wants, she's very staunch in her opinions, but, you know, like, the whole crux of that movie is by the end, she's, like, tamed by the man. Like, she tampers herself down so that she can have this, and, like, obviously that is one of myriad issues with that 2000s rom-coms. Yeah, I mean,
and it was also just because, like, even without, like, you know, 2000s rom-coms, like, sometimes in cartoons that I would watch, there would be, like, a male character who really, like, has a crush on this other girl, and they make him, like, constantly pursuing her when she's very clearly not interested. It's like it's a joke. It's a gag, it's like, it's a joke, and they're like, oh, haha, just give him a chance. But, like, in real life, that is incredibly, like, annoying, and not just annoying, it's, like, incredibly scary
and disrespectful,
and incredibly disrespectful, and it just also, like, it normalizes for these young girls that, like, it is normal for men to disrespect their autonomy on, like, a regular basis, and it also teaches men that, like, not only are these behaviors natural, but they're not going to be punished for that, and, like, they shouldn't expect, you know, any kind of pushback.
Yeah, like, that's, like, this is something that, like, fascinates me to know, and, like, the media is, like, truly one of the biggest, like, forces in socialization, and it is a teacher to children, like, no matter what, like, that's why representation in media is so important, because what children see and what everyone sees really in movies and TV and music in fashion shows, like, that has there have been studies and statistics that show that it does have a significant impact on just, like, their self-image and how they perceive various minority groups and just, like, people around them, and seeing those dynamics and that behavior so normalized in media it trickles down to everyday life and to, you know, the individual. And I think that's something that's, like, very important to consider and be mindful of, and, like, obviously there have been huge strides forward in terms of that, but, you know, it's not perfect in the slightest, and there's still, like, so much of those, like, harmful behaviors that are so normalized in shows and movies. So.
And also, like, even still with, like, my mom is someone who's, like, very, like, you know, feminist. She doesn't, like, she, you know, she wanted to raise me and my brothers all the same and everything. But, like, even her, like, she has some of those, like, internalized misogynies, because, I mean, like, she grew up in the 80s and the 90s. Like, that was, you know, the things that were just very accepted. And so even things like that, because I was always, like, someone who, like, ended up, like, hitting puberty early and developing early. And it was also just, like, this, thing, like, you know, I noticed that people started looking at me differently, like, once your body starts developing. And then also, like, my mom would be, like, worried, because of course, like, you're wearing child's clothes, it would, like, fit you a little bit lower. And, you know, my mom would be, like, worried sending me to school, like, in something more fitted, because she remember once she said, she was like, well, I just didn't want you to wear that because you get so upset when, like, boys say stuff to you, or, like, boys say you, and I just don't want your day to be ruined. So it's just, like, already, like, she's trying to protect me from, like, what other people will say, she wants me to change my clothes, which is already, like, putting that idea of, like, well, it's, if you don't want that quote unquote kind of attention, then it's up to you to change your clothes. And, like, you know, even things, or just the way that you act, even, like, my own brother, who, you know, is a, like, very progressive person, he would, when we were younger, he would say things, like, when we'd, like, see girls online, like, complaining about, like, guys staring at them in the gym, and he would just say, like, well, I don't understand, like, if they don't want guys to stare at them, why don't they just, like, stop wearing such short shorts? And I'd have to explain to him, I was like, well, that's not the issue. I was telling him, I was like, Zabe, like, if you, like, if he, like, you work out on the track shirtless, you would be upset if, like, a girl started coming up to you and flirting with you when you didn't want that, and they're like, well, why are you shirtless sweating out here on this track, sir, if you don't want a guy to flirt with you? And it's not even like flirting or complimenting, it's like the catcalling, the degrading comments, like it's getting followed, like especially if you live in like New York or something.
Right.
So it's just like there's very much of a like the foundation for like the victim blaming is like already there. Yeah.
And, yeah, the culture of victim blaming minimizes like it is like so inherently harmful to like survivors, and even at like the smallest scale, like again, just having that so deeply embedded into our culture and into the socialization process, it perpetrates like such a harmful cycle for young girls and for women. Yeah, and also it also just like points to I also feel like the culture around like, oh, women, you need to do this, and also like the whole thing of like, oh, women, if a guy has problems, you need to like stay and help fix him. Yeah. And I just think that also helps with like not only like sexual violence, but also like how so many women end up experiencing domestic violence, because we tend to romanticize a lot of those like red flags where they're like, I've seen like even people my age like romanticize a romantic partner being obsessed with you or being really, really jealous or being very possessive. And in reality, like that stuff is only cute in movies. Exactly. When someone is like obsessive and possessive over you, they start like controlling your life. Yeah. And of course, you know, when all you see of like, oh, he's so obsessed with me and he does everything for me, when in reality, like an obsessive partner will probably end up killing you to like keep you from being with someone else. And again, like that goes like in romance novels for sure, in romance books, like there is such this like trope of like, you know, like the mob boss. Yeah, the bad like, boy. Exactly. Yeah. Like he's like dangerous and it's always like romanticized as like, oh, like good girl, and then but it is really harmful in like normalizing and romanticizing violence and looking at it through such rose-colored glasses. Yeah. And it's not something that people should be taking and applying to their real life and saying, oh, this kind of behavior is okay, like it's hot, like it's whatever, you know, because it's not. Yeah, it's not at all. And then also just, I mean, not only do we like romanticize the like red flags of an abusive or manipulative partner, we also shame people who like are get into those situations and then are stuck, because like that is just, if you're with a manipulative partner, they're gonna make you feel like, oh, like, well, you were nothing until I met you. You can't leave. And especially like with how we, you know, tell women that like already like you need to serve the man and you need to fix him and his problems, and like he loves you, you know. And just like how like a perfect example is like when all of the news came out about how like Rihanna and like Chris Brown had like severely beaten her, and they had gotten back together, and people were like, well, if it was really that bad, then why would she go back? So it's just like we really, really just normalize like the suffering of women and like the pain of women to the point that, you know, women would feel more comfortable getting murdered by a wild animal than a man. Exactly. Yeah. And like, again, like going back to victim blaming, like I feel like with Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez, like there was such, or even with like the sexual assault cases against like Brett Kavanaugh, for example. Like there was this, well, if it was so harmful, if it affected her so much, why wouldn't she speak? Or Harvey Weinstein, like the whole Me Too movement, that whole story from the New York Times, like this whole thing of if it was really that awful, if it was really that terrible, why are they just saying things now? Why are they only speaking up now? Like, oh, they're just hopping on the bandwagon, like whatever, is so minimizing to their experience and what the awful, awful things that they went to. And again, it's like, well, of course they're not going to speak up because this is what happens. Right. Like, you're going to, like, regardless of when they said something, regardless of how they did, like, it is almost inevitable that there will be people who will say, well, XYZ, to try and disregard and minimize their experience. And I think, again, like it all goes back to that like culture of victim blaming that's so embedded and so harmful.
Yeah, and I like that you bring up the Me Too movement, because I remember when I was younger, my mom taught me about Anita Hill, who was like the first like Me Too movement like in modern history, because she, if you don't know, when Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was in his confirmation process, there was a woman named Anita Hill who I think she may have been his assistant. It doesn't matter. She worked in his office, and she accused him of sexual harassment, sexual assault, one of the sexual misconduct. And she like brought all the stuff, and she testified very publicly in like in front of the Senate, and it was like one of the first times that, like a very public, you know, accusation of sexual assault against someone so powerful. And I remember there's this one clip, she's a Black woman, and she's like sitting in front of this panel of like all these old white men, and they're like asking her these questions, and she's trying to explain, and right in the middle of her trying to explain, the person cuts her off and closes his book, and like that was the end of the hearing. So they basically like dismissed her allegations, and then later he was confirmed. So it was just like that's what happens to people who, you know, to women who speak out, and especially like, you know, like the race and has definitely like something to do with it, but it's just like there's so much like the fear of, you know, trying to stay safe, and then the fear of having violence committed against you anyway, and then also the fear that like no one's going to believe you, and if someone does believe you, then people are going to shame you, and then like even if you try to press charges, like having to go up on the stand and like recount this incredibly horrific event, and then like they might not even get jail time. They most likely will not.
The criminal justice system is just not set up to actually help women. To like do
anything. And it's just, you know, like going back to like the whole like man versus bear, it's like all of this is like such a reality for women. And I also, because this is just like common knowledge for a lot of women, I did not know that men didn't know that women do this. Like I saw this video of this guy being like, he's like a married man, and he was like, did you know that women send their location to their friends before they go on a date?
Or I've seen the same thing with like the car keys, like
the car keys in between your fingers.
Like that's something that I knew to do from like elementary school, fifth grade.
I remember I learned that when I was like 10. And I learned a modified version where you take your sharpest key and you hold it like an ice pick, and then you go for the eyes instead. And I remember also when I was like 9 years old, I started growing out my nails in case I had to like claw someone's eyes out. And then also like I remember there's like this famous clip of like it's like on like the Graham Norton show. It's like Saoirse Ronan with Paul Mescal and one other guy. And Paul Mescal is talking about, he's like, you know, like I can't imagine like always thinking about like if someone attacks me, how I'm gonna fight them off. And Saoirse was like, you do know that like girls are thinking about that all the time. And like all the men went silent, because it's just like it's like it's true that, like, I mean, especially if you're white, they just can't imagine a life where you're always on the defense.
And, you know, like, the opposite is true. Like, I can't imagine not, like, walking downtown and not thinking about the man across the street. Or, you know, noticing that my tank is empty but not getting gas because the sun's set. Or, you know, taking my dog when I go on a walk or whatever. Pausing my music. Like, just like all these little things that are so second nature at this point. I can't imagine not having to consider that.
Yeah, or like the like leaving like a piece of your hair in an Uber, and like the location sharing I've always been doing, and then also like the like pretending to be on the phone if you think someone looks creepy, like
acting crazy,
all these things. And it's just like I don't know a life without these things, and it's just crazy that to me that there are people out there who are never going to know this life, and then get angry when it's pointed out that no, like I don't feel safe around you, because why would you?
Yeah, maybe the bear is the
the bear is the better option, because like even with people, there have been so many cases of women especially like getting killed by their partners, getting sexually assaulted by their friends, being killed by their like, you know, family members, sexually assaulted by family members. So it's just like even with people who you can't always trust that you're going to be safe. And yeah, I just think that, like, like, the bear is the better option. Because, like, if I'm, I think it's not only the fact that, like, yeah, a bear might kill me, so will a man. It's just that I think that there is just more dignity in being killed by a wild animal. Because it's just, like, if you're killed by a wild animal, he's, like, a bear is not going to, like, sexually assault you before he murders you. He's not gonna, like, try to hide your body or, take a trophy from you of your belongings and then, like, replay the moment in his head of the time he killed this, lone hiker. And I just think that it's, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I also want to it's just, like, even the thing also is that, like, there are lots of precautions you can take. And, like, wild animals are more predictable than men.
True. Like, if I'm hiking or backpacking or whatever, I know to take bear cans.
Right.
I know to pitch my tent, like, X amount of yards away. I know to not leave out food. I know to not bring deodorant and toothpaste and, whatever with me. And if I do encounter a bear, I know to stay still. I know to play dead. I know to hit them in the nose and run away, should it come to that.
Yeah, like,
and those are all fairly... not foolproof, but
like things you can do to avoid it. And it's just the thing, it's just, like, I think that's why so many women feel more comfortable with the bear, because, like, all of those ways that, like, people know you can deter a bear. And so many women do all of the quote unquote, like, right things. They do the right stuff, and then they still end up as a victim. And I just think that that's, like, the perfect example is just, like, grizzly, I mean, not all of them are grizzly, but bears are brutal. They are, like, they will, like, rip your skin off of your face. And the fact that so many women would prefer that than to be alone with a man
speaks volumes.
Yeah, it speaks volumes. And I just think that, like, if you're angry about that, then maybe you should talk to your guy friends and like, stop doing what you're doing. But do you have any other thoughts?
I feel good.
Yeah. So I'm gonna close out by asking you, if you were alone in a forest, would you pick man or bear?
I'd probably go with bear.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for coming on. This is great.
Yeah, thank you for having me.